Thanks. You have a seat. We're in the book of Joshua. So let me walk you through where we are, bring you up to date. The children of Israel had been slaves in Egypt. So you remember the whole story of Pharaoh and Moses and the let my people go. So what happens is the children of Israel leave Egypt. Should have been a straight, short trip. Instead, they ended up disobeying God and not following God. And so they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So as they wander in the wilderness for 40 years, they come to the end of it. Everybody over the age of 20 dies, with two exceptions, Joshua and Caleb. As Moses dies, Joshua takes over. Joshua now leads the children of Israel across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. We've talked about this story and how they camped at Gilgal, and then they ended up dividing up the land. By the time in the last couple of weeks, we've dealt with how the land was all divided up. And so as we start our story this morning, this is what Canaan looks like as far as divided up. Every tribe is in their area. Every tribe has their land with one exception, and that is the tribe of the Levites. And so Joshua chapter 20 and Joshua chapter 21 deal with this last group, the Levites. And next week we're going to talk about the cities of the Levites. The Levites are not given land, they're given cities. And we'll talk about why next week in Joshua chapter 21. But when it's all said and done, the Levites are going to be given 48 cities. But 6 of those cities are going to be called cities of refuge. And that's what Joshua chapter 20 is all about. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So with that in mind, let's look at Joshua chapter 20. Here's what it says. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge, as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood." We're going to talk about that concept this morning. That's an important part to understanding Joshua chapter 20. He goes on to say this: when they flee to one of these cities, they're to stand in the entrance of the city gate. They're state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive, because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice and aforethought. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then they may go back into their own home in the town from which they fled. So basically what he talks about here, are 6 cities that are set up. There are 3 on the east side of Jordan and 3 on the west side of Jordan, and they are strategically located. We're going to talk about that at the end. But one of the things that they have set up is this idea of what they call the cities of refuge. And that has some important principles and some important things that we can understand as we go this morning. So let's back up and understand the culture at the time. The culture at the time basically was, under the Mosaic law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And here's what that meant. If you were responsible for the death of somebody, you had to die. That was the law. The way that was enforced was this. If you killed somebody, the nearest male relative had an obligation to find you, hunt you down, and take your life. That's the way it worked. That was the avenger of blood. And they could do that under the law as that was okay. In fact, it was expected. And in fact, it was set up to where that is exactly what God wanted it to be at that time. So I'm going to give you a scenario and kind of explain this to you and how this thing would have worked. Years ago, when we were building that building, what happened was we didn't have any heat in the building, and we were working, and so we got an old furnace, and we put it in the middle, or off to the side of the thing. We cut a hole in the wall, and we put the pipe out there. And I don't remember what the project was, but I know it was Lael and I, we were up here working. We had the scaffolding, we were working on that far window up there, and so it was evening, and as we were working, and we started feeling funny. And so, we're up there working, and then we looked at each other and said, you feeling like lightheaded? Yeah, I am feeling kind of lightheaded. I thought it was just me. And what we realized is there was, the way we had set up the pipe, it was carbon dioxide was coming into the building, and so we were getting carbon dioxide poisoning. We didn't know that. So we shut it all down, and then we left and let it air out a little bit, and then we redid the pipe later and all of that. But let's just say, and this isn't how it happened, but for the sake of illustration, we're going to do it this way. Let's say just for a second that Earl was the one who put the furnace in, okay? So here's the way this would have worked. So Earl puts the furnace in, okay? And he doesn't set the pipe up right. And Layla and I are up here working, and we get carbon dioxide poisoning, and we die. Now, under the Mosaic Law, the way it was set up was this. JT and Josh and Brian and Dana, their obligation was to hunt Earl down and take his life. It's the way it worked. That's the way it worked. They were the avengers of blood. And they could do it legally. Now, here's a question. Did Earl intentionally try to poison us? No. Well, I don't remember what was going on at the church that time. Maybe he did. I don't know. Let's take out 2 of the board members and we'll get it. No. He wasn't intentional. In other words, he just hooked up the furnace. There was no mechanism in the Old Testament law for an unintentional, unintended death. None. The Avenger of Blood concept said, you were responsible for their death, you die. That was the Avenger of Blood concept. So God sets up what he calls 6 cities of refuge. And they're strategic in their location, and we'll talk about why that's important in a minute. But the way it worked was this. So in that scenario, what Earl would have done is Earl would have looked at his wife and said, Liz, I got to get out of here. He would have run to the city of refuge. He would have stood at the gate, and the elders, the leadership of that city, would have said, who are you and why are you here? He said, Earl, here's what happened. I set up the furnace. These 2 guys died. They're going to take my life. I'm seeking refuge here. And they would have said, fine, you can come on in for now. And then they would have had a gathering of the leadership, and they would have decided whether or not his claim was legitimate. If they think that he had intentionally caused the death, they would kick him out of the city. If they had determined that his actions were unintentional, then they would say, you may now live in this city, and we will protect you. So if JT or Josh or Dana or Brian showed up to the gate and said, we understand Earl Rose is in here, they would have said yes, and he's under our protection. You can't touch him. If Earl decided he wanted to go south for the winter, and he left the city of refuge, and JT or Josh or Dana or Brian met him, they could legally take his life. As long as he's in the city, he was safe. He could stay, he was required to stay in that city until the priest died, the high priest died. When the high priest died, he was then allowed to go back to his own city, and they could have no retribution or no reason to take his life. That's why the city of refuge were set up. There are a ton of principles in this thing. There are a ton of Bible concepts that will help us. A lot of people sometimes are using this when we're dealing with this immigration issue in America right now. They're using it saying, well, the cities of refuge, it's a city. No. This was unintentional. It's not about an intentional act. And if the city had decided that his actions were intentional, then they would never have given him safety within the city. So that's the whole concept, okay? there are a lot of principles that will help us as we go on. I want you to notice, first of all, the location of the cities, because this is very, very significant. No matter where you lived in Canaan, you were a day's journey from a city of refuge. Every one of those cities you could travel to, no matter where you lived, you could reach one of those cities in a day. Now that's an important principle. Here's why. The cities of refuge were accessible to everyone, even if they were not Jewish. Anyone could find safety in a city of refuge, no matter who you were, and it only took you a day to get there. And that's an important concept. Because you see, a lot of people like to take the cities of refuge and parallel it with the church today. Here's the thing. The church needs to be accessible to everyone. The city of refuge was a place of safety. It was a place of protection. It was a place where somebody could go and they knew that they were going to be taken care of. If you looked at a map, here's what you will find. You will find that every one of these cities is located on a major trade route or a major road. Think interstate. In other words, anyone could easily get to it. That's the way they were set up. And that's the way a church ought to be. Anybody should be able to walk in those doors. Anybody. It needs to be accessible to everyone. And one of the things that you learn about the cities of refuge is the way that they were set up. Everyone had access to it. And everyone had an opportunity to feel safe and to feel protected and to feel that way as a person. It was not a place, and if you'll think about it for a minute, think of who's living in these cities. These are all people who had messed up at some point and caused the death of somebody else. These were people who were struggling. These were not people who had their act all together. You want to know what the church needs to be? If you come here thinking that we've all got our act together and everybody's got their ducks in a row, if you think you have your ducks in a row, what you're going to find later is you probably have squirrels and you didn't even know it and you're dealing with ducks. I mean, honestly, it's one of those things where we are all struggling, we are all learning, we are all growing, we are all in this together. And if you're looking for the perfect place, the city of refuge was just simply a breather. It gave you a pause for somebody to think about what you had done, and it had allowed you to, it had shifted, we'll talk about this in a second, it had shifted the focus from individual responsibility to corporate justice. And it changed the dynamic. It changed the dynamic in a big way. And we want this to be a place that anybody can walk into. Okay? Now, by the way, it doesn't mean there weren't consequences. In my situation, so let's say Earl shows up at City of Refuge, they say, you know what, yeah, it was an accident. We're going to let you come in here. Now, wait a minute, his life's been turned upside down. Because everything that he knew, he's now living in a different place. He's living in a place he can't leave. I mean, his world really had turned. There were still consequences, even though what he did was unintentional. So this is what you have when you have these cities of refuge. The second thing is this. For the first time, you deal with this idea of justice and mercy. You see, the avenger of blood concept is all about justice. You took a life, you lose your life. The cities of mercy introduce the idea of mercy. We're not going to look so much at your actions as much as we're going to look at your intent. Let me say it this way. We're not going to look at what you're doing. We're going to look at your heart. We're going to try to find out why this happened. For the first time now, we went from a system in which it was all about justice, individual justice, to a deal now where the community is going to weigh in and have a say in whether or not what you did was right or wrong, whether it was intentional or unintentional. And so One of the things that you see is this thing dramatically changes. In the same way, guess what? The church. You know what we need to do here? We need to try to see a person's heart. Not necessarily what they do. The Bible talks about it this way: love covers a multitude of sins. The idea is this. I use my wife as an illustration. There are times that she can get owie. Okay? And you know what I do? I look at it and go, I love her. She's having a bad day. We all have bad days. It's okay. And I go work in the shed. I mean, I'm not an idiot. I mean, I don't have to necessarily hang around it the whole day. But I mean, no, seriously, I love her. I look past it. Why? Love covers a multitude of sins. I don't have to, I can say, you know what? I know her. She's just having a bad day. She really didn't mean it. Let me just caution you. Anytime I deal with a person who's under a lot of stress, anytime I deal with a person who's under, for instance, grief, sudden loss, illness, let me tell you something. I give them tremendous latitude in anything they say. Because I don't know if it's the medication talking. I don't know if it's the pain talking. I don't know if it's hurt talking. I don't know what it is. But you know what? I know that this is not how they've been most of their life. So I can look past it. I can try to look at intent. And the church needs to be a place where we try to see people's hearts. Because there are some people that honestly, they mean well, but they don't come across that way. And you have to give them latitude. You have to give people space to grow. What happened is when these people walked in the city gate, the elders would meet with them, and the elders would try to help them understand why they did what they did, not necessarily what they did. What they did, justice demanded death. Earl didn't have any malice towards trying to take us out. He put a furnace in. Now, again, this didn't happen. I don't know who put the furnace in. We probably put the furnace in to gas ourselves. But, I mean, there wasn't malice in it. It was an accident. And you looked at it and you went, you know what? He doesn't need to die for that. They looked at intent. And they looked at it not as individuals, but as a group. The group now has said, we understand what happened, and you don't have to die for it. We will protect you. We will keep you safe. And so for the first time, you have this introduction of mercy and justice. And by the way, this was set up before Moses. So this is set up long before they got into this land. And so you see that as a principle. The last thing I think you see, and this is probably the most exciting thing, is the idea of this is a picture of salvation. Because you need to understand, you know what you deserve? You deserve death, eternal death, separation from God for all of eternity. That's what you deserve, that's what I deserve. Is that intentionally what we want? No. So God provides a way in Jesus Christ to take care of our sin, to cover our sin, to allow us safety in the city of refuge under God's care, because Jesus is what? The great high priest. And under his leadership, we have safety and we have protection. And we don't have to face eternal death, eternal separation from God. Why? Because the city of refuge is a picture of salvation for the believer. Don't have time to run down this rabbit trail, but I got to show you this verse. Listen to Hebrews chapter 6. God did this so that by two unchangeable things, which is impossible for God to lie, notice what he says. We have fled to take hold of the hope set before us so that we can be greatly encouraged. This passage is a link to the cities of refuge that people fled to in order to have hope. And he talks about in this passage about Jesus being a great high priest. And what you need to understand is the fact that Jesus Christ provided a way for us to have salvation because of his grace and because of his mercy, and we have the opportunity to flee to him, and he will provide safety, comfort, and protection because he is the great high priest. And so it is a beautiful picture of salvation, but it is also a picture of what the church should be like. And so I just want to encourage you this week as you go throughout to understand a couple of things as we apply it. The cities of refuge help us to better understand God and the church. We learn that God is a God of mercy and he cares for human life. We also see a picture of how the church should act to be a place of shelter, safety, hope, comfort, and grace. And it's a reminder of what we need to do this week as we go out into a world that desperately needs Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the time. God, we are so grateful that we can put our faith and trust in you. And Lord, just as these cities of refuge gave people a second chance, that Lord, you had given us a second chance at life to live life differently. So God, I just pray that you would help us as we go out in the world this week, that people would see you in us. I ask that you would use us to be a light in a very dark world. And that, Lord, as we struggle sometimes with accepting people as they come into our lives, that we would learn to really have the attitude of being gracious and merciful. And we'll give you the honor and the glory and the praise these things we ask in your name. Amen. We're going to stand.